and welcome back to room 303 in Freshman English. And I'm with you in your hymnals now on page 676, 677 and following. We're going to be working with Mary Tall Mountain's There Is No Word for Goodbye. But before we get there, I'd like to point out that we'll be looking now at 4 titles that There Is No Hope for Goodbye, Daily Hope, and The Day of the Storm. All of them were asked in our textbook to compare. So if you would please look at 676 for just a second. Comparing literary works, especially comparing imagery. I need you to write that word imagery down at level 2B. And let's now pay attention for a few moments to this concept in poetic rendering. Imagery is language that appeals to one or more of the senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. The use of imagery allows writers to express their ideas with vividness and immediacy. Images create mental pictures for readers and help them connect their own experiences to the worlds the writers describe. The emotional responses writers evoke through the use of vivid imagery allow a poem or other work to come to life in readers' minds. Interpretations of imagery may differ as readers view a work through the lens of their own life experiences. Comparing imagery is important in analyzing the aesthetic qualities of a variety of selections. These are the stylistic qualities that make a poem's language beautiful. Writers, for example, often include patterns of images. By recognizing these image patterns or motifs, write that word down, motifs or image patterns, you can better appreciate differences and similarities among selections. As you read these 4 poems, use a chart like the one below to compare images and the senses they address. So for example, we'll begin with There Is No Word for Goodbye, and then go to Daily Hope and The Day of the Storm. And each one of these will want to ask, what is the imagery that's being played with? The visual and sensual, we might say, word pictures, okay? Now our first poem we're going to study is the Mary Tall Mountain, There Is No Word for Goodbye. Let's take a look on page 677. Notice we do have our guiding question here. Again, how does communication change us? We've been talking, of course, in each one of these poems about this question of the power of language. Let's take a look at Mary Tall Mountain quickly, write down a couple of things about her. Notice your dates, 1918 to 1991. Right? She is Native American, Mary Tall Mountain, born in Alaska. When Tall Mountain was 6, her mother died, and she was adopted by a family who removed her from her culture. And There Is No Word for Goodbye, Tall Mountain reconnects with her Native American roots. So let's go ahead now to page 678. Notice right away we're going to have emphasis at literary analysis on imagery. Do you see it on the left there? For 2 different times they're going to ask you about this one, right? In this poem, we're going to have an exchange, a dialogue of a kind between the finality of death, about the finality of death, between a young adult and an elderly aunt. So in other words, we're going to have an exchange here that is going to kind of have the youth-old age thing going on. Now let's pay close attention here. We'll just study the poem quickly, read the poem, and then we'll exegete.
There Is No Word for Goodbye by Mary Tall Mountain. Sequoia, I said, looking through the net of wrinkles into wise black pools of her eyes. What do you say in Athabascan when you leave each other? What is the word for goodbye? A shade of feeling rippled the wind-tanned skin. Ah, nothing, she said, watching the river flash. She looked at me close. We just say tla. That means see you. We never leave each other. When does your mouth say goodbye to your heart? She touched me, light as a bluebell. You forget when you leave us. You're so small then. We don't use that word. We always think you're coming back, but if you don't, we'll see you someplace else. You understand. There is no word for goodbye.
Okay, let's turn now and take a look at this really ingenious little poem. Let's pay attention first of all to the speakers, so write that down. Who are the 2 speakers? Well, let's say 2 things about them. First of all, you have Sequoia, who is the aunt, okay, the mother's sister, as described at the bottom of the page, yes, okay? So you've got someone who is young asking someone who is old. You have someone who is in the culture and someone who is kind of outside a bit of the culture, asking a simple question. Hey, aunt, old person, in our culture, or in the culture that I'd like to know more about, what is the word for goodbye? Notice in the first stanza, the imagery, net of wrinkles, right? That's how the face is described. Jot down why that's such a powerful image for you. Net of wrinkles. We think about that Tennyson poem, The Eagle, and the wrinkled sea beneath him crawls, and here we've got wrinkles, only now we're not talking about the ocean, we're talking about this old woman's face. Wrinkles, of course, are going to display what? They symbolize what? Well, many times they represent wisdom, don't they? Right? Notice the irony. In our culture, we work really, really hard as we age to try to get rid of all the wrinkles. In other cultures, wrinkles are kind of like a badge of honor. They mean you've gone through a lot. They mean you know stuff, right? And therefore, as an elder, you are worthy of requests, questions from the young, right? So the wrinkle, the net of wrinkles here is significant. Notice the wise black pools of her eyes, okay? Now the question is, what is the word for goodbye? You kind of get the sense here they're about to have to leave each other. And there's again, notice a shade of feeling rippled, the wind-tanned skin. So along with the wrinkles, right, we've got the wind-tanned skin, which means this aunt, this older person has been through a lot, right? And then she'll say it. Nothing, she said, watching the river flash. The river, of course, is significant. They're sitting by a river because the river is significant that it kind of represents in some ways life itself. Life is kind of like a river, right? That keeps flowing. In other words, nothing is ever stasis. You don't get to stay the same person or the same age that you are. All of that is contained in the river. She looked at me close. We just say, ta. That means see you. We never leave each other. And then, of course, the central question of the poem, when does your mouth say goodbye to your heart? The notion of symbiosis. Everybody is together. We're all connected. We don't say goodbye because we're never actually apart. And the reason we're never actually apart is because we're always together in our mind or our soul or our spirit as opposed to our body, right? Then notice she touched me, and then an interesting simile. Notice all the nature imagery. Light as a bluebell. You forget when you leave us. You're so small then. We don't use that word. In other words, once when you were young, you knew this, but then you left our culture, and now that you're back, you've forgotten some things that I have to help you to remember. Let's put that one in our notes. This is obviously as well an idea that the old have to help the young to know what it is that we should be remembering, right? We always think you're coming back, but if you don't, we'll see you someplace else. You understand? There is no word for goodbye. Let's jump to level 2A quickly and talk messages, themes here. One of the most obvious is that the old have to teach the young. But the young have to be willing to hear the old. Yes, there has to be a relationship there. The old can speak to the young, but if the young don't want to listen, that's that opening line from Plato's Republic, a text you'll learn in your senior year. How can we hear if we refuse to listen? The opening lines of Republic. And of course, that is a classic instruction to the young. You have to be willing to not just hear, but listen. Try to understand, in other words, right? A second major message is that in life, everything is ongoing. Everything is evolving. There is no stasis. And because everything is moving and going forward, then obviously there is no word for goodbye. There's no reason to consider it a goodbye. It's just, we'll see you again when we catch up again. Of course, this finally, number 3, is a poem about hope, isn't it? It's a poem about never giving up, especially on the things that define who you are, especially your culture and your heritage. At 2B, of course, the powerful imagery. Jot down which one for you is the most profound picture. Some like that net of wrinkles, especially because they're sitting next to the river. And what do you do in the river? You use a net to catch fish. And so it's all kinds of beautiful imagery going on here, right? At level 3A, what is the text for you where the old teach the young and the young have to learn from the old? What is that text for you? Is there a song that kind of helps you to know that one? Is there a way for you to kind of think about the importance of the young and the old? The classic text of Daedalus Icarus comes to mind, where the old Daedalus tells the young Icarus, I'm making these wings, but when you use them, don't fly too close to the sun. And of course, Icarus, the boy, has no interest in listening to the old man. Gee, does this sound like one or two freshmen that we know of? And instead of listening to the old man, jumps out, flies too close to the sun, falls into the sea and gets cranked. So this story is always kind of standing behind the youth-old age tension, which leads us to 3B. What's a time in your life when an old person taught you something and it forever changed your life? Looking back on it, it seems silly and inconsequential at the time, but it was kind of really important. What's a time, when you played Icarus to a Daedalus in your life? Some old person told you, you need to do X, you better consider Y, and you didn't listen. And now you kind of go look back and you go, I wish I kind of listened, because falling into the sea from 130 feet in the air is, well, it's painful. I could have avoided some pain. What's a time in your life, finally? What's a time in your life when you had to deal with goodbyes? And realizing, does it give you any hope, that there is no such thing as goodbye as in it's over, but rather it's, we'll see you later. No matter where that is, we'll catch up with you later. Is there any sense of hope there? Well, Mary Tall Mountains, there is no word for goodbye. I hope this text challenged you a bit. Thank you.